Righto, Senator
Thank
Ross.
you. Thanks. So look, I just wanted to start just getting an understanding of the sort of chronology of where we're up to. As a local Maribyrnong resident, it's been something that has been on the Maribyrnong community agenda for a very long time. So, as I understand it, we had the defence activities closing down on the site in 2002 completely, that's correct?
It would have been the early 2000s. I'm not sure of the specific date, but it was around that time.
So that was 15 years ago. And then in 2009, there was the agreement between the Department of Defence and the Victorian Government to the arrangement that the Victorian Government was going to purchase the site and develop it. That's correct?
There was certainly an agreement by the federal government that they would pursue what is now called an off-market sale to the Government of Victoria, subject to detail.
Yes, but it was a deal, as I understand it, media reports at the time, a deal to transfer ownership of the site to Victoria was announced in 2009 by Defence and the then Premier.
There was no deal at that time. There was an intention to negotiate to see if a deal could be reached.
Okay.
And a deal was never reached.
Was never reached. But so then following that in 2010, we had a shared vision that was developed for the site by the Victorian Government. And that's, so were Defence involved with that shared vision, do you know?
I imagine that was something that was developed by what was then named Places Victoria. I'd have to take on notice whether Defence was actually involved in the creation of that vision in 2010.
I mean, certainly at the time, I was a Maribyrnong councillor between 2003 and 2008, and my understanding was that, yes, Defence were actively involved because in terms of issues of the contamination of the site, they needed, you needed to have the involvement of the then landowner. So that was 2010, and so since 2010 until the budget announcement, the community had been progressing on the understanding that this transfer from the Defence to the state government, now Development Victoria, was going to occur. So that's correct?
It's incorrect to characterise it as a transfer. It would have been a sale.
Well, a sale.
Subject to terms of agreement, which were never reached.
Yes, but certainly whether it was a sale or not, I remember the time when I was on council, there was a question as to whether Defence might actually have to hand over money as well to the state government, given the level of contamination that was required to decontaminate the land. So clearly it was a very complex negotiation for what's been described as one of the most complex decontamination projects in the country. So
that's fair. It's been a difficult negotiation over a long period of time.
So then negotiations occurred from that 2010 time, and it's at 2010 that the indication was that 3,000 new dwellings could be constructed. So you understand that was the community's expectation at that stage.
I think that was probably a figure that was published as part of that vision that you're referring to, which would have been, I'm sure, would have been led by Places Victoria.
Yes, and so it was 3,000, and it's of low and medium density housing was what was anticipated in that vision. So since that time, so there have been negotiations. So what communication had there been? Can you fill me in on any chronology since 2010 in terms of communication with, say, local council or with state government to have any indication that things weren't going to, finalise in a sale to Development Victoria?
So the main negotiation has been between the Department of Defence, my group, and Places Victoria, which is now named Development Victoria. There would have been other conversations throughout that process with other bodies. Certainly the EPA, Victorian EPA, have been involved in conversations as well, and I know the council from time to time. But the main negotiation was really between the Department of Defence and I'll refer to them as Development Victoria, that's their current name, and Development Victoria, of course, working on behalf of the Victorian Government.
Yes. So when, obviously there were some backwards and forwards, but when did it look, I mean, were there any milestones in between then before we got to the stage of Defence then rejecting Development Victoria's final bid?
So over several years, we'd had several occasions where we thought we might be getting close to an offer that looked acceptable, but there were issues would arise that would require further work, and the last and final offer from Development Victoria was late last year. That offer was considered by the federal government in the context of value for money, and the decision was that, informed by advice from strategic advisors that we've contracted, that the deal that was on offer did not represent best value for money, and that if we went to an open market process, we might be able to get better value for the Australian taxpayer out of the development.
So when were Development Victoria informed that their deal had been rejected? That their offer had been rejected?
I informed the head of Development Victoria on the day of the budget announcement.
On the day of the budget announcement?
Yep.
So people had been proceeding right up until the budget announcement that the likelihood was that there was going to be fulfilment of the agreement in 2009, that there would be a negotiated sale to the state government, right up until budget day.
The Development Victoria were very aware that when they'd lodged their best and final offer with us, they were very aware that the process required government cabinet consideration, and they were very aware that until a decision was made, there was no decision.
So, and when did Cabinet consider it?
It would have been, I'd have to take that on notice. It was a few weeks before.
Early May.
Early May. So there was that period of time from, you made a decision late last year. So when exactly was late last year did you make a decision that their bid was not acceptable?
Well, I didn't make any decision. We provided, we received a best and final offer from Development Victoria, I can't just, in December last year, so very late last year. That was analysed and then...
So who analysed it? What was the process of
analysis? It was analysed within the Department of Defence with a lens of best value for money, noting advice we had from strategic advisors familiar with this market, and a range of options were put to government, and the decision was made in early May, as the Minister has just said.
Right. So when were the range of options put to government?
For the decision in early May.
Right, so but when?
I'd have to take the actual date of that meeting on notice.
And, okay, so, and when were the local council informed that that was going to be the process that was undertaken?
Well, the council would have been informed of the decision on or around at the same time that I informed Development Victoria. The council would have been aware that there was a government process that needed to be gone through following receipt of the best and final offer from Development Victoria.
Are you going to be requiring potential land purchasers to do their developments that are consistent with the shared vision that was developed in 2010?
So any development that will take place will be subject to local planning laws, as you'd expect. Once a property is changed hands into a private developer, they'll be subject to all of the normal planning rules and regulations that apply from the council and the Victorian government, from the Victorian EPA.
But one of the big issues, I mean, as you know, and as people who live locally know, it's a very large site, and a lot of the issues associated in the shared, that are outlined in the shared vision, relate to the site as an entirety, and you've got a whole new community there. So just complying with planning laws for individual sites will not necessarily fulfil the shared vision that was developed with the community over a long period of time. Would you accept that that's the case?
The issue of final planning approvals will be one for the local government.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the overall vision for the site, not final planning approval. And having these individual parcels that you are going to be selling to the private sector to give the federal department, the best value for money, won't necessarily meet the shared vision that the community developed in the years leading up to 2010.
I don't think I've said anything about individual parcels. We're going to approach the market looking for the best value. It's most likely that a developer will put in a bid for the whole site and will be able to develop the whole site as a package, subject to the planning laws that apply in the state of Victoria between the Victorian Government, the Council and the EPA.
Okay. And Senator, what we have said, what the Commonwealth has said, both from the perspective of defence and from the broader Commonwealth perspective in terms of our approach to unlocking Commonwealth land to try and reduce pressure on housing affordability, what we've said specifically in relation to defence site Maribyrnong is that we are committed to working with both the Victorian Government and the Maribyrnong City Council to ensure a number of things. For example, that the site includes an appropriate share of social and affordable housing, that it is properly serviced by supporting infrastructure. We recognise, for example, it has significant cultural and social heritage value. So there has previously been a heritage plan prepared and the intent would be that a number of its heritage features would be integrated into the new development. You've asked some questions about remediation and Mr Grishkowiak's spoken to those. I'm sure there are more that you would wish to pursue, but this is intended to be a consultative, engaged process that addresses a number of policy outcomes. Effective use of surplus Commonwealth land, issues around housing affordability and the ability to use a site very close to the Melbourne CBD, 10 kilometres from the Melbourne CBD, 127 hectares.
I know the site well, Minister.
Yeah, I know that. And I've come to know it and love it myself. And a number of those factors.
Okay, there is such level of sense in having the state government develop that site for those very reasons that you talk about, particularly the supporting infrastructure. Whereas if you are selling it to the private sector, actually having that coordination becomes much more difficult.
And that's some way down the road, Senator. We're not even close to that point yet. There's a number of steps to take.
Can I go back to the negotiations with Development Victoria? Can I ask what the issues that you were negotiating over were?
A whole range of issues, Senator, as you might expect. One of them was obviously price. One of them was how we deal with remediation of the site, which, as I've discussed before, is complicated. Issues around timing of development, how the heritage buildings will be treated and how many of them would need to be retained or not to ensure that the heritage values are protected. So those sorts of issues.
So what outcomes are you hoping to achieve that you consider will give better value for the federal government that you weren't able to achieve with your negotiations with Development Victoria?
So as I said before, I don't want to talk about specifics because
just in general. Because
the bid that we had was in confidence, and clearly we will be approaching the market at some point, and I don't want to say anything that might interfere with that approach to market in due course.
Okay, well,
and is it the case, if I could just interpose, that in the event that it does go to open tender, the Government of Victoria there's no limitation or no restriction on them bidding?
The Government of Victoria would be able to be part of that open tender process if they chose to do so.
Okay, I want to get...
Last question, Senator Rice, thanks.
Oh. Some details about exactly... You talked in the questioning earlier on about there actually being 3 different divisions within the site. There was one part which had already been decontaminated by Defence. What site is that? I have the remediation report in front of me, which divided the site into 6 environmental audit areas. Is the division into the site based on those environmental audit areas?
I'd need to come back with detail around that. The best way to have that conversation is actually with a map of the site, sort of around a table.
I could table a map of the site.
We'd be happy to provide a briefing to you.
But I'm sure that you know, in terms of there's audit area 1, which is the one that was less contaminated. What's the status of that audit area 1 site now?
Yeah, I don't want to say anything that might mislead you. I don't know exactly. We did do an area of decontamination, as I said, in one of the areas that was at the lower end of the scale of contamination. The site is divided into areas for purposes of analysis of the site. That's a different thing than in terms of the sale. As we go to market, we'll look at the best way of disposing.
I'm
of
running
the
out
site.
of time for this period of questioning now. Would you be able to get those details and come back to me when I have another go later on this afternoon?
We can see if we can do that. I'm not sure what time that will be.
You might consult the Hansard from the earlier discussions. Senator
Yes, I listened very
Oh, you
closely to
did.
the
Okay, then, thank you.
Hansard.
Good. Thank you.